In a shocking turn of events, Josie Duggar, the youngest child in the famous Duggar family, has tied the knot. But while her wedding should be a joyful celebration, it has sparked tension and anger from her father, Bob Duggar. Today, we're diving into the details of Josie's marriage, her new chapter of freedom, and why Bob isn't happy about it. As the baby of the Duggar family, Josie has always held a unique place in the spotlight. Fans will remember her dramatic arrival into the world back in 2009, when she was born prematurely and faced serious health challenges. From the very beginning, her life has been closely tied to the family's strict rules, conservative values, and, of course, the ever-watchful presence of Bob and Michelle Duggar. But growing up as the youngest in such a large and highly scrutinized household also meant Josie witnessed the paths her older siblings took, the marriages, the scandals, and the many ways some Duggar children began to break away from their parents' control. Now, Josie's own story is unfolding in a way that's both surprising and inspiring to many. Her marriage doesn't just symbolize love. It represents independence, a chance to step outside the rigid Duggar traditions and into a life of her own making. And while her wedding has delighted fans who have long hoped the youngest Duggar might take a different path, it's also ignited controversy within the family. Bob's rumored disapproval has only added fuel to the conversation, raising questions about how this new chapter will affect Josie's relationship with her parents and siblings. From the very beginning, Josie Duggar's life was nothing short of extraordinary. Born in December 2009, Josie was the 19th and youngest child of Bob and Michelle Duggar. But her arrival into the world wasn't an easy one. She was born more than 3 months premature, weighing just over 1 pound at birth. For months, her survival was uncertain. Fans of 19 Kids and Counting watched as the Duggar family prayed, worried, and clung to hope during her fragile first year of life. Against the odds, Josie survived, and her journey became one of the most inspirational storylines for viewers of the show. Growing up, Josie wasn't just the baby of the family. She was the miracle child. Fans had the rare chance to watch her grow from a tiny preemie hooked up to machines into a lively, spirited young girl. Every milestone, her first steps, her schooling, and her personality blossoming, was broadcast on national television. But while this exposure made her a fan favorite, it also meant that Josie grew up under a microscope. Unlike her older siblings, who had at least part of their childhoods away from the spotlight, Josie's life was televised almost from the start. Being the youngest in such a massive household also came with its own challenges. Josie often had dozens of siblings and even nieces and nephews close to her own age. She was growing up alongside not just her brothers and sisters, but also their children. While her older siblings were starting marriages and building families of their own, Josie was still navigating her teen years. This unusual dynamic highlighted the unique position she held within the Duggar family. And of course, there were the strict Duggar family rules. Bob Duggar maintained firm authority in the household, particularly when it came to relationships, courtship, and marriage. The Duggar children were expected to follow guidelines rooted in their conservative religious beliefs. No dating in the traditional sense, no physical intimacy before marriage, and always involving parents in the decision-making process. For most of her siblings, this meant carefully monitored courtships that led quickly to engagements and weddings. Fans often wondered, would Josie follow the same script when the time came? But Josie's situation was always a little different. By the time she grew into her teenage years, the Duggar family had faced scandal, controversy, and public criticism. The once tightly controlled image of the perfect Christian family had cracked. This raised even more questions. Would Josie, having grown up seeing both the good and the bad sides of fame, choose a different path for herself? Or would she remain under Bob's rules and traditions? For years, fans speculated about Josie's future. Because of her age, she wasn't old enough to court or marry while the family's reality shows were still on the air. This meant that unlike many of her siblings, she had the chance to step away from the cameras before those big life decisions came. And now, with her recent wedding, it seems Josie may indeed be writing her own story, one that looks very different from the paths of her older brothers and sisters. Josie's love story is one that fans didn't see coming. Unlike many of her older siblings, whose courtships and engagements were publicly documented under the strict guidance of Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, Josie's path to love unfolded more quietly. Reports suggest that she met her partner outside of the rigid Duggar bubble, possibly through mutual friends or within a social setting not entirely controlled by her parents. This in itself marked a bold step for the youngest Duggar, choosing to explore relationships on her own terms, rather than waiting for approval from her father. When news broke that Josie had gotten married, fans were stunned. Not because they doubted she would ever marry, but because of how different her wedding appeared compared to those of her siblings. The Duggar daughters before her often had massive, highly publicized ceremonies, sometimes attended by thousands of people, with every detail overseen by Jim Bob, from the dress code to the guest list to the wedding vows themselves. Josie's wedding, however, was notably smaller, more intimate, and far more personal. Rather than a production for TV cameras or a way to showcase the Duggar family's values, Josie's celebration reflected her individuality and the love she genuinely shared with her partner. Fans were quick to praise Josie for the decision. Many took to online forums and social media to say how refreshing it was to see a Duggar daughter step away from the scripted traditions of the family and create a moment that was truly her own. Words like brave, independent, and strong were used repeatedly to describe her, with some saying that Josie was setting a new precedent for what freedom could look like in the Duggar household. More importantly, all signs pointed to the fact that Josie's marriage wasn't orchestrated by Jim Bob. There were no reports of a heavily monitored courtship or her father approving the relationship on her behalf. Instead, it seemed Josie herself had chosen her partner, her timeline, and even her wedding style. That independence marked a radical departure from the Duggar family playbook, where parents, particularly Jim Bob, typically dictated every stage of their children's romantic lives. This marriage, then, wasn't just about Josie finding love. It symbolized her taking back control of her own life. In many ways, it was her quiet rebellion against years of strict upbringing, and fans couldn't help but celebrate the fact that she managed to embrace happiness on her own terms. When news of Josie's marriage surfaced, whispers quickly spread that Jim Bob Duggar wasn't entirely thrilled about the way things unfolded. While the Duggar patriarch has always maintained a very specific vision for how his children should approach courtship and marriage, Josie's path seems to have been different, quieter, more independent, and less governed by her father's traditional oversight. Over the years, Jim Bob has been known for keeping a firm grip on the process. Courtships were announced with his approval, weddings were large-scale productions that doubled as family and church events, and every decision seemed to reflect his guiding hand. To many fans, Josie's wedding appears to be a clear departure from that established pattern. Instead of following the heavily monitored system her siblings endured, Josie's choices show signs of a younger Duggar generation that values privacy and personal control. This isn't the first time tension has brewed within the Duggar family. Viewers have seen how Jill Duggar publicly distanced herself and her husband Derek from Jim Bob's authority, even speaking openly about financial disputes and restrictive family rules. Jinger, too, has made headlines for rejecting her parents' teachings, moving across the country, and writing about her struggles with this strict upbringing. These examples highlight a broader shift within the Duggar family dynamic, one where younger children, especially those growing up after the height of the show's fame, are questioning Jim Bob's long-standing dominance. Josie's decision may not just be about her own happiness, it could be symbolic of a larger movement among the Duggar siblings. For years, critics have speculated that as the younger children come of age, they might follow in the footsteps of Jill and Jinger rather than continue under Jim Bob's control. If that's the case, Josie's marriage could be yet another domino falling in the slow but noticeable unraveling of Jim Bob's once unchallenged influence. While it's unlikely that Jim Bob would openly criticize Josie's choices, especially given the scrutiny the family is already under, the silence or lack of public endorsement speaks volumes to fans. Many believe that this quiet disapproval is a sign of deeper fractures behind the scenes, fractures that may widen as more Duggar children carve out their own identities apart from their father's authority. Josie Duggar's recent marriage doesn't just mark the beginning of a new family for her, It also represents the start of a new chapter of freedom. Unlike many of her siblings who grew up under Jim, Bob, and Michelle's strict authority and expectations, Josie has a unique opportunity to carve out her own identity apart from the Duggar brand. For much of her life, Josie has been seen as the family's miracle baby, the premature child whose survival story was heavily documented on 19 Kids and Counting. That image stuck with her through her childhood and teenage years. But now, with her wedding, Josie has the chance to rewrite her narrative. Instead of being defined solely by her role as the youngest Duggar, she can define herself as a young woman starting fresh, with her own marriage, her own choices, and possibly her own beliefs. This independence could mean embracing a lifestyle quite different from what fans expect. She might choose more privacy, step away from the public spotlight, or even adopt new traditions that differ from her parents' conservative upbringing. If history is any guide, Josie could follow in the footsteps of her older sisters who made bold moves for independence. Jill Duggar distanced herself from the family and even wrote a book detailing her struggles. Jinger Duggar moved across the country to California with her husband Jeremy, where she embraced a more modern lifestyle far from the Duggar compound. For Josie, the path ahead is open. The question now is how much she will remain connected to the Duggar family. Will she continue to show up at the big family gatherings, holidays, and weddings? Or will she, like some of her siblings, quietly distance herself and build a life with more space and independence from Jim Bob's authority? Either way, Josie's marriage signals more than just a personal milestone. It's a symbolic turning point, a reminder that the youngest Duggar is no longer a child under her father's control, but a woman stepping into her own future. And with fans watching closely, her decisions in the coming months and years may reveal just how far she is willing to go in separating her identity from the Duggar legacy. As news of Josie Duggar's marriage spread, fans wasted no time in sharing their reactions, and the response was nothing short of explosive. For many longtime followers of the Duggar family, Josie's decision to marry on her own terms symbolized a bold act of independence. Supporters flooded social media with congratulatory messages, applauding her for taking control of her own life, free from the shadow of her father's influence. Comments poured in, with many fans calling her brave and inspiring, while others said this could mark the start of a new era for the Duggar children who grew up under intense restrictions. Media outlets quickly picked up on the story, speculating about what this meant for the already fragile Duggar family dynamic. Headlines suggested that Josie's move could deepen the rift between Jim Bob and some of his children, while others posed the question, was this the moment that finally cracked the Duggar family's carefully maintained public image? Analysts pointed out that the Duggars have always leaned heavily on presenting a united front, but Josie's independent marriage sent a very different message to the world. On social media, reactions were mixed but passionate. Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit lit up with discussions, with one camp praising Josie's courage to step away from the rigid expectations of her upbringing, while another criticized her choice, questioning whether she had truly broken free or was simply trading one set of rules for another. Still, the overwhelming majority of fans seemed to frame her decision as a positive, even liberating move. What makes Josie's marriage particularly significant is how it might influence her younger siblings and cousins. Many fans believe that by choosing a different path, Josie has set an example for the next generation of Duggars who may also feel the pressure of strict family traditions. If Josie, who grew up almost entirely in the public eye, can carve out a new life for herself, others may see that as permission to do the same. In this sense, her bold step isn't just about one marriage. It's about a potential ripple effect across the Duggar family, one that could change the legacy of the famous household forever. Josie Duggar's marriage represents more than just a personal milestone. It marks a turning point in the Duggar family's legacy. As the youngest of the 19 children, her decision to marry on her own terms sets her apart from the traditions that defined her parents' authority for decades. Her independence is a strong signal that a new era is unfolding, one where the younger Duggars may begin to live beyond Jim Bob's influence and create their own paths. While Jim Bob may be unsettled by the shift and the loss of control, fans have been vocal in their support, celebrating Josie's courage to embrace freedom and authenticity.